I'm going to do a little bit of just kind of housekeeping notes, but give you a sense of how the day is going to go. First off, glad many of you have turned your cameras on. We definitely, during the Q&A, encourage that. If you need to step away, that's totally cool. We're in weirdo work from home pandemic time, so we totally understand about dogs, babies, everything else in life. So if you do need to step away, that's fine. But as Susan also said, just keep muted during the presentations. But after the presentations, we're going to do a Q&A with each individual speaker, and then we'll do one more as like a panel with everyone at the very end. So what we're going to do is during that Q&A, feel free to unmute and be able to ask questions relatively freely. Although I will also be keeping, sort of as a moderator, keep a lookout on the chat for questions. And what we'll do is tackle those during the Q&A. In other words, not interrupt the speakers as they give their presentation, but I'll kind of moderate, grab some of those during the Q&A part. And if you'd like to say them out loud yourself, you certainly can, or else I can also field them in the chat if you have any. After each presentation and after the Q&As, we're going to do a little 5-minute break just after every single one. Part of that is for tech, part of that so everybody's got a little lifestyle moment. You can go top up your coffee or whatever you need to do. And so we'll do that after each speaker, except for the very last. You may be able to hear my baby in the background, trying to give her input right now. So one of the things I was going to mention too, we've got 2 sponsors for today, Dominion Energy and Tito's Vodka. You'll hear me mention Dominion with the Q&As, and Tito's is sponsoring the presentations themselves. And last but not least, I just wanted to say that I'm really excited for today's presentation. The entire concept of this workshop day was to really give some interesting tools, not just for individuals, but for organizations. But whether you are a young professional seeking to make a difference yourself, or whether you're someone who frequently works with them, we're really excited to take your interests and energy and those of your peers and really help you give some tools to make a bigger difference in your community and in the organizations that you care about. I think I speak for many to say, in this day and age, and I mean that meaning 2020, the dumpster fire that it is incredibly important that we find ways to connect this energy for change, whether that's for social change that you believe in, the organizations that desperately need your input and your skills and your talents and your interests. And so we're really hoping that out of today, you're able to not just potentially energize yourselves, but even understand how to connect with your peers better so that you can really help some incredible organizations and some incredible causes. For example, like SOAR 365. And so with that, I'm actually going to hand it over to a dear friend and newly minted Vice President of Marketing and Communications at SOAR 365, Deanna Miller. And I should let everyone know, Deanna was asked to speak before she became Vice President at SOAR. She was already on the docket. So if I can ask everyone other than Deanna to mute, and then Deanna's going to share her screen and get going with her presentation.
Great. Good morning, everybody. Please bear with me as I share. You might see a photo of my son, or if oh, look, I went straight to the PowerPoint. Somebody please confirm. Am I good? Okay. So good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for taking time out of your weekend to spend some time with us. I wish we could all be in person, but alas, 2020, as Dean said. But I very much appreciate all of you being here with us. First and foremost, I want to say, thank you for being a volunteer. I'm sure that most of you are on this webinar because you already are volunteering, maybe with one or multiple organizations. As Dean said, this year and probably in the coming years, your help will be incredibly important in supporting nonprofit organizations. So thank you for being a do-gooder, and even more so being on this webinar because you are interested in taking your interest to the next level. So you might be volunteering now on a monthly or quarterly basis, and now you're interested in going to the next level and becoming a volunteer leader. So giving even more of your time and expertise, and that is truly appreciated. So thank you for that. So what my background is marketing and communications, but what I'm going to talk to you about today is really what the process should be, or what a process could look like as you decide which organization or how many organizations you want to select to become volunteer leaders. Because you are volunteers and because you are likely interested in many things, this is a good opportunity for you to narrow down those interests and make a decision and select an organization to which you will give more of your time and expertise. So you might have been volunteering with organizations that work with animals, or you might have an interest in climate change or the cleaning of the environment. You might be a fan of organizations that work with children. You might have children yourselves, or you might be a fan of art therapy. So oftentimes we have a myriad of interests, but it is time to think through and narrow down those interests in order to make the best decision and select the best organization with which to take your volunteerism to the next level. So how do you go about that? How do you know where to channel this passion? Because this will be a long-term commitment. So the last thing you want is to select an organization, invest time and do orientation and do training and find out a few months down the road that it's not a good fit. So before you commit long-term, you want to make sure you do your due diligence and select the right organization. So depending on what type of personality type you are, you might go through this process a little differently. I am a type A personality. So for me, this type of a decision-making process looks like a brainstorm or an opportunity to make some lists. You might be the type of person who would prefer to discuss this with a friend or family member and just kind of talk through this process. So start with a brainstorm, start with a list, and ask yourselves, what are your values and priorities? Think about the things that you are interested in and decide if some of them are short-term interests versus long-term interests. Short-term interests are things that you might be interested today because of context. You might be interested in something because you have small children. You might be interested in something because you live in a certain area. Long-term interests are things that you will be interested in 10 years down the road, regardless of where you live or what age your children are or whether or not you have a pet. So think about the short-term versus long-term and how that can determine the level of interest that you will have with an organization down the line. You also want to ask yourselves, what type of volunteer are you? What are your expectations? Do you get satisfaction out of making an impact on a one-on-one level? So are you interested in that type of a relationship? Or are you the type of person who is interested at making an impact at a larger scale, organizationally speaking? And asking those types of questions will get you a step closer to narrowing down the type of organization that will be a good fit for you. Another question, and something that should be part of this exercise, is really digging deep on the mission of an organization. Oftentimes when you are a monthly or a quarterly volunteer, you might be really familiar with one aspect of an organization's mission. You might be very focused on one project, on one area of an organization. However, when you want to commit to being a volunteer leader, you want to dig deeper than that. You want to have perspective and understanding of the entirety of an organization in order to make sure that you're selecting the right organization. Oftentimes, nonprofit organizations do way more than meets the eye. So that is why we go through this exercise. I'll use SOAR 365 as an example. So as Susan mentioned earlier, we work for and with people with disabilities. And so we have a lot of programs that you might expect from an organization such as ours. We have adult day support programs. We work with children and youth. We have pediatric therapy, and we have a respite program. So those are all things that might come to mind immediately as you look into our organization. However, what you might not know is that we have an entire area of the organization or entire department called business solutions that has several programs under its umbrella, a workforce development, supported employment. So we support the employment of hundreds of people with disabilities. You might not know this just off the top of your head when you think about SOAR 365. So that is the type of information that you want to make sure you have. This might be of particular interest to you, or the opposite of that. You might not have an interest in this, and so that might be a factor in your decision-making process. So again, digging deep on the mission and making sure you have an overarching understanding of an organization and its work in its entirety. Next is thinking about your personal goals and how those align with the organization that you are considering and its mission. So now that you have narrowed down sort of the area that you're interested in, you have narrowed down potentially to a couple of organizations and you've become familiar with their mission. Now you sort of flip the other side of that coin is having a good understanding of what you are trying to get out of the experience. Oftentimes as volunteers, I don't think we ask ourselves, what am I trying to get out of this experience? We go into volunteering relationships with organizations just wanting to give back to an organization, wanting to give back to a certain population or community. But when you become a volunteer leader or working in that direction, you want to make sure that you ask yourselves that question. What am I trying to get out of this experience? The answer might be simple. The answer might be just personal satisfaction, and that is 100% appropriate. However, depending on where you are in life, you might want to have additional value back from that experience. For example, you might be looking for actual experience. You might be new in a certain industry or new in the workforce and are looking to sharpen certain skills and boost your resume. So that might be something that you're interested in. You might be new to an area and you're trying to connect with like-minded individuals. So you might be looking for networking opportunities through this volunteering leadership experience. So having a clear understanding of what you are also trying to get out of the experience will help you with this process. Thinking about skills is also important. What are the skills that you are bringing to the table for the organization? That will also dictate to a certain extent the type of organization that you will be involved with. And also on the flip side of that, what skills are you trying to sharpen? For example, you might have an interest in volunteer leadership. That is something that you, or volunteer management, and that is something that you want to sharpen. That is maybe an area of interest professionally. And so you are looking for an organization that will allow you not only to give of your time and expertise, but also learn about volunteer management. Certainly, oftentimes, smaller nonprofit organizations have a simpler or less developed infrastructure. So you might not have an opportunity to connect to individuals who are focusing on volunteer management. Flip side of it, if you choose a larger organization that has a large infrastructure, you might have that opportunity. So determining the types of skills that you're bringing to the table, but also the types of skills that you're trying to sharpen will also help. So what I call the sweet spot is, that intersection of your goals and how those goals match up with the mission of an organization, your skills that you're bringing to the table and the types of skills that an organization is looking for, and your values. Once all of those things overlap, the sweet spot and the organization that you will choose will be that one that's right there in the middle. Something that as we go through this process, we oftentimes don't ask is what are the audiences of an organization? And how does this organization message themselves to these audiences? And you might ask, why does that even matter? Well, because oftentimes, just like with its mission, and as I said earlier, organizations do more than meets the eye, oftentimes nonprofit organizations also serve more audiences and communicate to more audiences than you might think. So this graphic just gives one example, and what the reason why this matters is because you might have a particular interest in one of these audiences, or you might be completely turned off by one of their audiences and you would want to not have anything to do with them. So going back to the SOAR 365 example, obviously you immediately would think one of our audiences are our program participants or our clients and their families, and you would be correct. But we have multiple layers of additional audiences. We talk to donors, we talk to volunteers, we talk to our internal staff, we talk to the employers who employ our clients or potential employers. We talk to government entities that either for reimbursement purposes or other grants and things like that. We talk to the greater disability community as well as the press. And so there are just layers and layers of audiences that are important to us as an organization, and they might be to you as well. So you want to know what those are. Last but not least, in addition to being familiar with these audiences, you also want to consider the way an organization communicates to these audiences. That can tell you a lot about an organization. It can tell you a lot about the depth of their infrastructure. It can tell you a lot about their priorities. And it can tell you a lot about how, quote unquote, together an organization is. That might matter to you. It might not, but it might. And so you want to make sure that you have a good understanding of this. Luckily, in today's world, we can figure that out very quickly by doing a Google search of the organization's name. You can take a look at their website. You can take a look at their social media channels. You can look at whether or not traditional media has covered that particular organization and what are they saying about them. You can also look at non-traditional media. Are there any blogs or bloggers that are writing about the organization? Is there any chatter online? You might actually find forums of volunteers who have experience with that particular organization that might shed some light on their experience, which in turn will help you decide whether or not that organization is a good fit. So going through this process might seem lengthy, it might seem very detailed, but at the end of the day, becoming a volunteer leader means giving even more of yourselves, of your time and your expertise to an organization. It also is an investment on the side of the organization itself, again, for the training and orientation and bringing you in the fold of projects. And so on both sides, it would be greatly beneficial for you to ensure that you find the right fit from the beginning. So this is just outlining a process that will help you get closer to that. I'm sure there's more to it than that, but this is just to give you a starting point. And that's it. Those are all my prepared remarks. And Dean, I think this is time for some Q&A.
You bet. So like I said to everybody, please feel free if you'd have a question you'd like to put in chat, that's great. Or if you want to chat it to me privately or to everyone, that's fantastic. Also, if you'd like to simply open up your unmute and ask a question, that's great too. I'll get us kicked off though. One of the things I thought was interesting, first off, I really liked especially your the sort of the sweet spot slide, because I think that that's something that often we think of our interactions with a nonprofit as a volunteer as being very one-dimensional, and it's often what we hear the nonprofit needs because we saw a flyer or we, got invited to a fundraiser or something like that. And it's very rarely from our perspective. It's sort of like our communication perspective. So anyway, my question though was also about folks who are moving into the area, like who might just literally just move to a new area. A lot of times we bring with us our thoughts about our organizations we used to work with. So in other words, it's like, well, I've worked with, I'll use my wife's organization, Make-A-Wish, as an example. I worked with Make-A-Wish over here in this state. Are they going to be the exact same when I move into Richmond? Or I might be moving, anywhere in the country. Any thoughts about how do you explore to find out like chapter organizations? Like, are they the same, and how to maybe go about that?
That's a great question. So SOAR 365 is also part of a network of organizations. So if you with the similar missions, and so if you come from a different area, you might be familiar with them. We have recently rebranded, so they're not all called SOAR 365, but they have similar missions. So I think it behooves us to not have preconceived notions. I believe that chapters of the same organization can be very different in the experience in terms of volunteerism. So if you have an interest in an area and maybe had an experience in your previous location that was not necessarily positive, or maybe it was really positive, but you're curious if it would be exactly the same in your new location, my recommendation is to, one, do some research at the local level, speak to folks in the community, and connect to the organization itself. There will always be folks in the volunteer engagement area that will be more than happy to talk to you and to answer your questions and to give you a taste of what the local chapter is like, the type of work that it does, the type of people that you'll be working with. So I think generally not coming at it with preconceived notions, but rather keeping an open mind, because there can be big differences. The size of a chapter in Richmond can be drastically different than the size of a chapter in Chesapeake or the DC area, large or small. So that also can greatly impact the type of work that they do, how organized they are, the type of volunteer opportunities that they will have. So it can be night and day. So reaching out to the organization and also doing some research. There are all these folks, in the Richmond area, Connect VA, the Community Foundation, some core organizations that are very familiar with many nonprofit organizations in Richmond, and they would be good guides for someone who's new in the area and is looking to connect to a nonprofit organization.
Oh, that's great. We had a good question too, and this will also be one I think I might carry over to David for the fundraising angle too. When, from a communication standpoint, whether it's thanking donors, thanking volunteers, and even thinking about whether you're a young professional and understanding what you may like as a communication style, but also then thinking about what your peers may like. Can you talk a little bit about electronic versus paper-based, and sort of making that decision? And it may not be just generational, but, just about communicating.
Sure. So I think as nonprofit organizations, and any organization really in today's world, it's a difficult balance to strike, because especially in the nonprofit world, resources are always a consideration, and so oftentimes print materials and things like that can be costly, and so we rely heavily on the online, virtual type of communicating, but generationally speaking, there's still very much a need to, people like to have something in hand. And so we work hard to strike that balance to make sure that not only do we make the most out of our resources, but also that we don't neglect a certain population, whether they are donors or some of our families who might be more comfortable there. So when you're looking at how a nonprofit organization communicates, that's something to keep in mind. Oftentimes, there's that very difficult balance to find between that print and sort of old school and a new school, if you will, communication.
Well, and just to add to that, I think there's some weird nuances even between electronic. The people that want emails, people that don't want emails. I mean, it's its own.
How often?
Yes. Yeah. How often? It's its own special balance there too. We have a great question also from Carrie here. I'm actually going to read it verbatim, Carrie. Hopefully, I won't mangle it. If you're a young person looking for nonprofits to volunteer with, or if you're a board looking for board members, what are the best ways to search for the right board opportunity? is the Community Foundation the only listing in the Richmond area? And I would also say that there are other elements like things like Connect VA, other than Community Foundation necessarily, but if you could talk to that a little bit on either side of that coin.
So somebody just posted that the Richmond Chamber of Commerce has a matching program. So if you're looking for something specific, I did not know this, so thank you. That is a great way to go about it. And I'm actually going to ask Susan to jump in here because I guarantee you that she has a way better answer than I would on this question.
Sure. Hands-on Richmond is a good place to find board opportunities too. And I would say as a nonprofit person or nonprofit leader, we sometimes forget to post these opportunities on job boards. And so sometimes the best way that we find leaders is by looking in our current volunteer pool. So if you're interested in being a part of an organization, being on the board, I would suggest to start volunteering with them and learn a little bit more about them and make sure that you are a good fit and that you are in that sweet spot. And then talk to them about being on the board. That's a great way to kind of move up the organization.
Great. All right. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a 5-minute break. It'll give everybody a good chance to remute as we need before we get to our next speaker. But I've got a little bit of homework that came from a great idea that Katie Limmert in our crowd asked. So the homework for this next 5 minutes is for you to put in the chat the nonprofit that you either already are working with, maybe that you're already a volunteer, already in some way associated with a nonprofit, one that you're looking at, then like you're considering it, or maybe there's one or two, just who are you thinking of, just to get a good sense of what, all sort of across the gamut that everyone has involved with personally, maybe professionally in some cases, but that'd be awesome. So throw that into the chat. We are going to take a 5-minute break and come back at 10:38. I'm going to set my little timer. Feel free if you need to, go top up your coffee or whatever you need to do, and it'll give us a chance to remute, and we'll come back at 10:38. So thanks, everybody. We'll see you back in just 5 minutes.
Great. Thanks.